Get out and don't come back. You're 18 now, an adult. Figure it out yourself." Those words still echo in my mind 5 years later as I stare at the text message lighting up my phone screen. "Olivia, we need to talk. Dad's medical tests came back. It's serious. He needs surgery. Insurance won't cover everything. Please call us." I set my phone face down on my desk, my fingers trembling slightly as I try to focus on the code on my computer screen. The irony isn't lost on me. The parents who couldn't wait to wash their hands of me the day after my high school graduation are now reaching out because they need my money. 5 years ago, I stood in our driveway with 2 hastily packed suitcases and a backpack, watching, as my father closed the front door on 18 years of supposed family. My crime? Choosing to study computer science at the state university instead of taking over the failing family bakery, a business that had been draining our finances for years thanks to my parents' refusal to adapt to changing times. "You're betraying this family," my mother had said that morning, her voice cold as she watched me pack. "After everything we've done for you." What they had done was provide the basic necessities while reminding me constantly that family loyalty meant sacrificing my own dreams. My older brother Noah had escaped years earlier, joining the military and cutting contact. I had been their last hope to preserve the Evans family legacy, a bakery that hadn't turned a profit in nearly a decade. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I had nowhere to go that night. I sat on a bench in the town, park until dawn, using the free Wi-Fi from the nearby library to message everyone I knew. By morning, my best friend Zoe had convinced her parents to let me stay on their couch for a week. "Just until you figure something out," her mother had said, the pity in her eyes almost worse than my parents' anger. That week stretched into a month as I scrambled to figure out how to afford college without the family support I'd been counting on. My acceptance to State University had come with a partial scholarship, but it wouldn't cover housing or meals, and my savings from my part-time job at the local coffee shop would barely last a semester. "You should talk to Mrs. Chen," Zoe suggested one evening as we sat on her family's porch. "She always liked you in AP Computer Science. Maybe she has some ideas." Mrs. Chen had been more than my high school CS teacher. She'd been the first person to tell me I had a gift for programming. Her classroom had been my refuge during lunch periods when I needed to escape the weight of my parents' expectations. The next day, I sent her an email explaining my situation, my pride taking a backseat to desperation. She responded within hours, asking me to meet her at the school. "This isn't charity," she said firmly, as she handed me information about a coding boot camp that partnered with a local tech company. "This is investment in talent. The program offers stipends for promising students. You complete the 3-month intensive training, then work part-time for the company while you attend college. Housing included." I stared at the papers, hardly daring to believe this could be real. Why would they do this? Because good developers are hard to find, and they'd rather shape promising students than compete for established talent, she explained. "It's not easy. The boot camp is brutal, and balancing work and school will be challenging. But it's an opportunity." An opportunity was all I needed. The next 3 months were the hardest of my life. The boot camp demanded 14-hour days of intensive coding, with weekly evaluations that could get you cut from the program if you fell behind. I survived on ramen and determination, falling into bed each night in the shared apartment provided to boot camp participants. Too exhausted to even think about my parents or the bakery or the life I'd left behind. But I thrived. Code made sense to me in a way family obligations never had. When I built my first full-stack application at the midpoint evaluation, the lead instructor pulled me aside. "We have our eye on you, Olivia," he said. "Keep this up, and we'll be offering you more than just a part-time position when you graduate." Those words carried me through the grueling final weeks. By the time I completed the program, I had secured a part-time junior developer role that paid enough to cover my expenses while I attended State University. The company's office was close enough to campus that I could take morning classes, work, afternoons, and study evenings. I didn't reach out to my parents during this time. The wound of their rejection was still too raw, and pride kept me from showing them I could succeed without them. Occasionally, I would check the bakery's social media page, watching as the posts became less frequent, the special offers more desperate. It gave me no pleasure to see their business struggling, but it validated my decision to forge my own path. As my first semester of college began, I moved into a tiny studio apartment subsidized by the tech company as part of their talent development program. It was barely bigger than a dorm room, with a kitchenette and bathroom so small you could barely turn around, but it was mine. I hung fairy lights across the ceiling and bought a second-hand desk for my computer. For the first time since leaving home, I felt like I could breathe. It was Zoe who told me about the bakery closing. She had seen the "going out of business" signs while driving through our hometown. "Are you going to call them?" she asked during our weekly video chat. "What would I say?" I replied, absently debugging code while we talked. "Sorry your business failed, but I'm doing great without you." "Maybe just that you're okay, that you're in school. They might be worried." I laughed, the sound sharper than I intended. "They kicked me out, Zoe. They didn't ask where I was going or how I would survive. They don't get to be worried now." She didn't mention it again, and I buried myself deeper in my work and studies. By the end of my freshman year, I had been promoted to a full developer position with flexible hours to accommodate my class schedule. My GPA put me on the dean's list, and I was invited to join a competitive summer internship program at a major tech company in the city. It was during that summer that I received the first text from my mother. "Olivia, it's Mom. The bakery is closed. We had to sell the house. Just wanted you to know we're okay. We've moved in with Aunt Debbie." No apology, no questions about my life. Just an update, as if we'd merely fallen out of touch rather than broken apart completely. I read it 3 times, composed a dozen responses, and ultimately said nothing. What could I say that wouldn't reopen wounds finally beginning to heal? I channeled my conflicted feelings into my internship project, impressing my supervisors enough to receive a standing job offer for after graduation. When I returned for my sophomore year, I upgraded to a better apartment, one with actual separate rooms and a view of the campus gardens. I switched from part-time to project-based work, which paid better and gave me more control over my schedule. My life was coming together piece by carefully constructed piece. I had built my own support network. Zoe, who visited monthly, Mrs. Chen, who had become a trusted mentor, my colleagues at the tech company, my study group at university. I had created something from nothing, and the pride I felt in this accomplishment began to overshadow the hurt of being discarded. Then came Thanksgiving of my junior year. I had planned to stay on campus for the break, using the quiet time to work on my advanced algorithms project. Most students had gone home, leaving the computer lab blissfully empty. I was deep in concentration when my phone rang with an unknown number. "Olivia?" The voice was familiar but strange. My brother Noah, who I hadn't spoken to in nearly 4 years. "Noah, how did you get my number?" "Zoe gave it to me." He paused. "I'm sorry to call out of the blue, but I thought you should know. Dad had a heart attack yesterday." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Despite everything, the news hit like a physical blow. "Is he?" "He's alive." It was mild, a warning sign more than anything. But the doctor says he needs to make serious lifestyle changes, less stress, better diet. I closed my laptop, suddenly unable to focus on coding. "Why are you telling me this, Noah? They made their choice pretty clear when they kicked me out." His sigh crackled through the phone connection. "I know. They did the same to me, remember? But they're still our parents. I thought you'd want to know." After we hung up, I sat in the empty computer lab for a long time, staring at nothing. The familiar anger was there, but underneath it lurked something unexpected: concern. Despite everything, I didn't want my father to die. But I also couldn't bring myself to reach out, to make the first move toward reconciliation when they had been the ones to break our relationship. In the end, I sent a simple text to my mother's number. "Noah told me about Dad. I hope he recovers quickly." Her response came hours later. "Thank you. He's home now. Doctor says he needs to take it easy." That was all. No invitation to visit, no questions about my life. Just a brief acknowledgement that widened rather than bridged the gap between us. Life went on. I excelled in my classes, accepted the job offer from the tech company where I'd interned, and began planning for graduation and beyond. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When I walked across the stage to receive my degree, the audience held Zoe and her parents, Mrs. Chen, and colleagues from work, but not my family. At 22, I had accomplished what many couldn't claim until decades later: financial independence, a promising career, an apartment in a good neighborhood, and even the beginnings of a retirement account. The tech company had welcomed me as a full-time senior developer with a salary that made my eyes widen when I saw the offer letter. "You've earned this," my team lead told me during my first week orientation. "We've watched you grow from a promising student into a valuable professional. This isn't luck or charity. It's recognition of your skills and work ethic." Those words meant everything to me. In the years since leaving home, I had often battled the nagging doubt that I didn't deserve success, that I was somehow being punished for abandoning family obligation. Hearing such clear validation from someone I respected helped quiet those doubts. I was settling into my new role, finally feeling like my life was on solid ground, when the text came through. My father was sick again, more seriously this time. Tests, specialists, a diagnosis that required expensive treatment, insurance that wouldn't cover all the costs. And now they needed me. Or rather, they needed my money. I set my phone down and turned back to my computer, but the code on my screen had become just meaningless symbols. After 5 years of silence, after throwing me out with nothing, they expected me to open my wallet because of biological obligation. The same obligation they had discarded when it became inconvenient? My fingers hovered over the phone. Part of me wanted to ignore the message completely, to give them the same cold shoulder they had given 18-year-old me standing in the driveway with nowhere to go. But another part, the part that had built myself into someone stronger than the scared teenager I'd been, knew I needed to address this directly. I had learned over these years that avoiding difficult conversations didn't make them disappear. It just gave power to the unspoken. And I was done giving my parents power over my emotions. I picked up the phone and typed, "I'll call tomorrow, at 7 p.m. We have a lot to discuss before we talk about money." As I pressed send, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Whatever happened next, I would face it as the person I had become, not the person they had discarded. The frightened girl, with suitcases in the driveway, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built her life from the ground up, a woman who understood the difference between real family and mere biological connection. Tomorrow's conversation would be difficult, but for the first time since leaving home, I wasn't afraid of confronting my past. I had nothing to prove and nothing to lose. And that realization felt like the final piece of my hard-won freedom clicking into place. The boot camp changed everything for me. Those 3 months felt like being thrown into the deep end of a pool after only reading about swimming. We started at 8 each morning and often didn't finish until midnight, our eyes burning from staring at screens, our brains overflowing with new information. There were 20 of us when the program began. Only 12 made it to graduation. The shared apartment provided by the program became both sanctuary and battlefield. 4 of us squeezed into a 2-bedroom unit meant for students. Not comfortable, but better than the park bench I'd sat on my first night of homelessness. We bonded over late-night debugging sessions and celebrated small victories with cheap pizza and energy drinks. "You're picking this up faster than most," my roommate Dina told me one night as we worked through a particularly challenging assignment. "It's like you were made for this." Maybe she was right. While the other students struggled with certain concepts, the logic of programming felt intuitive to me. Each problem was a puzzle, and I'd always been good at puzzles, finding patterns, breaking complex issues into manageable pieces. Perhaps those skills had developed from years of navigating my parents' volatile expectations, always calculating the safest path through their disappointment. Midway through the boot camp, our instructors paired us with mentors from the partnering tech company. Mine was Eliza, a senior developer who had gone through the same program 3 years earlier. "I remember what it's like," she said during our first meeting at a coffee shop near the company headquarters. "The pace is brutal, and it feels like your brain is about to explode daily, but it's worth it." She reviewed my project work, offered suggestions for improvement, and most importantly, helped me understand what the industry would actually be looking for. "Boot camps teach you to code, but they don't always teach you how to be a developer," she explained. "There's a difference. One is about technical skills, the other is about problem solving, communication, and knowing when to ask for help." Eliza became more than a mentor. She became the first person in my new life who truly understood what I was trying to build. Not just a career, but a foundation of self-reliance that could never be pulled out from under me like my family had done. When I graduated from the boot camp at the top of my cohort, the company offered me a part-time position that perfectly accommodated my upcoming university schedule. The salary wasn't huge, but combined with my scholarship and careful budgeting, it meant I could support myself completely while studying computer science. "We're investing in your future," the HR manager explained as I signed the contract. "We see your potential, and we want you to grow with us." Those words, "we see your potential," struck a chord somewhere deep. How different they were from my father's dismissive, "You're throwing away your heritage for some computer fantasy." Someone was finally seeing what I had always known about myself, but had never been allowed to pursue. University classes began 3 weeks after the boot camp. Ended. Walking onto campus that first day, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride at having made it here despite everything, anxiety about balancing work and study, and a lingering sadness that my achievement would never be celebrated by the people who should have cared most. I had chosen to live in the tiny studio apartment provided through the company's housing assistance program rather than the dorms. It was barely 400 square feet, with a kitchenette in one corner and a bathroom so small, you had to step into the shower to close the door. But it was mine, paid for by my own efforts. No one could tell me to leave or threaten to withdraw support if I didn't meet their expectations. That first semester established the rhythm that would carry me through the next 4 years. Morning, classes, afternoon work at the tech company, evenings split between homework and coding projects. Weekends were for catching up on both, with precious few hours carved out for anything resembling a social life. Zoe visited when she could, bringing homemade cookies and updates from our hometown that I pretended not to care about, but secretly absorbed. "Your parents had to lay off their last 2 employees," she mentioned during one visit, carefully watching my reaction. "The bakery's only open 4 days a week now." I nodded, focusing on debugging the application I was building for work. They refused to create a website or delivery service when every other bakery in town was adapting. I'm not surprised. What I didn't say was how much it hurt that they had chosen a failing business over their own daughter's future, that they had valued tradition over innovation, even when that tradition was clearly dying, that they had been willing to sacrifice me on the altar of their stubborn pride. As my first year of university progressed, I threw myself into building both technical skills and connections. I joined the computer science club, attended every networking event I could fit into my schedule, and volunteered to help professors with their research projects. Not because I was naturally outgoing, I wasn't, but because I understood that in my situation, a strong professional network wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity. Without family to fall back on, I needed to create safety nets of my own. Every contact, every positive impression, every project successfully completed was another thread in the web of security I was painstakingly constructing. The strategy paid off sooner than I expected. My work caught the attention of Professor Jameson, who taught advanced algorithms and consulted for several major tech companies. At the end of my first year, he approached me about a summer internship with one of his industry contacts. "It pays well above the typical intern rate," he explained, "and it would give you experience with enterprise-level systems that most students don't see until after graduation." The opportunity meant I would have to temporarily relocate to Summit City, 3 hours away. It also meant I would need to take a leave from my current job. With my heart in my throat, I approached my team lead to discuss the situation, prepared for disappointment. Instead, she surprised me. "This is exactly what we hope for with our development program," she said. "Go, learn, bring that knowledge back. Your position will be waiting for you in the fall, possibly with more responsibility if you're ready for it." The summer internship transformed my understanding of what was possible in my career. Working for a major tech company, surrounded by brilliant developers from around the world, I caught glimpses of a future far beyond what I had allowed myself to imagine. I wasn't just coding to survive anymore. I was building skills that could take me anywhere. The paycheck from that summer allowed me to upgrade my living situation when I returned for my sophomore year. I found a one-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood, with actual separate rooms and enough space to invite friends over without feeling claustrophobic. I bought real furniture, not just the secondhand pieces I'd cobbled together from thrift stores and curb alerts. For the first time since leaving home, I felt like I was truly building a life, not just surviving. It was around this time that the first message from my mother arrived. A brief text that appeared on my phone one ordinary Tuesday afternoon. "The bakery is closing next month. Your father doesn't want me to tell you, but I thought you should know." I stared at those words for a long time, emotions churning. The bakery had been in my father's family for 3 generations. Its failure represented not just a business closing, but the collapse of my parents' entire identity and purpose. Despite everything, I couldn't find it in myself to feel satisfaction at their failure. I didn't respond to the message. What could I say? "Sorry about the business you chose over your daughter. Maybe you should have listened when I suggested updating your model 2 years ago." Nothing felt right, so I said nothing. 3 days later, another text arrived. "We've sold the house. Moving in with your Aunt Susan until we figure things out." The house I'd grown up in, with my height marked on the kitchen door frame and the backyard tree where I'd built a coding hideout when I was 14. Gone, just like everything else from my former life. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before finally sending, "I hope you land on your feet." Not warm, not particularly. Kind, but not cruel either. It was all I could manage. My mother's reply came the next day. "We always do. Your father still doesn't want to reach out, but I miss you." Those 5 words, "but I miss you," cracked something in the careful wall I'd built around my heart. Not enough to forgive, not enough to forget being thrown away, but enough to acknowledge that the severance hadn't been painless for her either. I didn't respond again. Instead, I channeled my conflicted emotions into my coursework, pushing myself even harder. That semester, I maintained a perfect GPA while working 30 hours a week and leading a team project that won the department's Innovation Award. "You're driving yourself too hard," Zoe observed during one of our video calls. "When was the last time you did something just for fun?" I couldn't remember. Fun had become a luxury I couldn't afford, not when every minute could be spent securing my future. "I'll rest when I've built something no one can take away from me," I told her, only half joking. "Liv, no one's going to kick you out again," she said gently. "You don't have to keep proving yourself." But she was wrong. I did have to prove myself, not to others, but to the scared part of me that still woke up some nights in panic, momentarily, forgetting I had a place to live, a purpose, a path forward. By my junior year, I had been promoted twice at my part-time job, taking on more responsibility and earning enough to start a modest investment account. Professor Jameson had become a mentor, guiding me toward research opportunities and introducing me to his industry contacts. My resume was beginning to look impressive, not just for a student, but for a professional developer. The messages from my mother became semi-regular, brief updates about their life, carefully avoiding any mention of our estrangement or the circumstances of my departure. I responded occasionally, keeping my replies neutral and fact-based. Yes, I was still in school. Yes, my job was going well. No, I didn't need anything. It was a strange, distant dance, acknowledging each other's existence without addressing the gaping wound between us. My father never reached out directly, though sometimes my mother would mention him. "Your father's found part-time work at the hardware store. Dad's having trouble with his blood pressure." I absorbed these details without comment, filing them away in a mental folder labeled "Former Life." They existed in a parallel reality that occasionally intersected with mine but no longer defined my identity or dictated my choices. Then came the Thanksgiving of my junior year and the call from Noah that changed everything. "Dad had a heart attack," he said, his voice crackling through the phone connection. "It wasn't major, but it's a warning sign. The doctor says he needs to make significant lifestyle changes." I sat in the empty computer lab, my abandoned project still open on the screen, trying to process this information. My father, the man who had closed the door on me without a second glance, was mortal, vulnerable. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked Noah, surprise making my tone sharper than intended. "Because despite everything, he's still our father." Noah sighed. "Look, I'm not saying you should forgive and forget. God knows I haven't. But I thought you should know." After the call ended, I sat motionless, staring at nothing. The familiar anger was there. Anger at being thrown away, at having to build my life from scratch. But beneath it lurked something unexpected: concern. Despite everything, I didn't want my father to die believing I had never amounted to anything. I didn't want that final, permanent severance. I sent a brief text to my mother. "Noah told me about Dad. I hope he recovers soon." Her response came hours later. "Thank you. He's home now. The doctor says he needs to avoid stress." That was all. No invitation to visit. No attempt to use his health as leverage to repair our relationship. Just information, leaving the next move up to me. I chose not to make one. Instead, I refocused on my goals, pushing through the remainder of the semester with renewed determination. When the tech company I'd interned with the previous summer offered me a full-time position upon graduation, I accepted immediately. The salary was generous, the benefits comprehensive, and the role challenging enough to keep me growing professionally. For the first time, I could see a clear path forward stretching years into the future. No longer just surviving, I was positioning myself to thrive. My senior year passed in a blur of final projects, job preparation, and planning for the transition to full-time work. I found a new apartment closer to the company headquarters, invested in a reliable car, and even took a short vacation with Zoe to celebrate our upcoming graduation, the first true break I'd allowed myself in 4 years. When I walked across the stage to receive my degree, the audience held friends and mentors, but not family. My mother had sent a text that morning. "Proud of you today. but neither she nor my father had asked to attend. Perhaps they understood they had forfeited that right. Perhaps they simply couldn't face seeing the success of the daughter whose dreams they had tried to stifle. Either way, their absence was a familiar ache, one that no longer had the power to break me. The transition from student to professional was smoother than I expected. Years of balancing work and study had prepared me for the demands of a full-time development role. Within months, I was leading small projects and mentoring new hires, including interns from the same boot camp program that had given me my start. "You're a success story," my old mentor Eliza told me over lunch one day. "The company uses your trajectory as an example of what's possible through our development pipeline." I smiled at that, thinking of all the unseen struggles behind that success story. The nights spent crying from exhaustion, the constant fear of failure, the loneliness of building a life without family support. "It wasn't easy," I admitted. "The best journeys never are," she replied, "but they shape you into someone stronger." At 23, I had achieved financial stability beyond what most of my peers could claim. My emergency fund covered 6 months of expenses. My retirement account was growing steadily. I had even started researching first-time homebuyer programs. Considering the possibility of owning rather than renting, I was secure, independent, and finally beginning to believe that this stability couldn't be yanked away on someone else's whim. The frightened 18-year-old with nowhere to go had become a confident professional with options and agency. Then, the text arrived that would force me to confront everything I had carefully compartmentalized over the past 5 years. "Olivia, we need to talk. Dad's medical tests came back. It's serious. He needs surgery. Insurance won't cover everything. Please call us." I stared at those words, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. The subtext was clear. They needed money, my money, for my father's medical treatment. After 5 years of minimal contact, after throwing me out with nothing but the clothes I could carry, they were reaching out because they needed financial help. The irony was almost too perfect. The daughter they didn't believe in, whose education they refused to support, whose dreams they dismissed as fantasy, that daughter was now their best hope. I set the phone down and returned to my work, but the code on my screen had become meaningless symbols. My carefully constructed professional demeanor cracked as emotions flooded through. Anger, vindication, hurt, and underneath it all, a question. I couldn't ignore. What did I owe to the people who had given me life but taken away my security? For days, I let the message sit unanswered. I went through the motions of my daily routine, work, gym, home, sleep, while the question churned beneath the surface. I discussed it with no one, not even Zoe, who would undoubtedly have opinions. This was a reckoning I needed to face on my own terms. Finally, after a week of internal debate, I sent a response. "I'll call tomorrow at 7 p.m. We should talk before discussing money." As I pressed send, I felt something shift within me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a willingness to engage with the past I had worked so hard to overcome. Whatever came next, I would face it not as the desperate teenager they had discarded, but as the woman I had fought to become. A woman who understood the difference between obligation and choice, between guilt and responsibility. A woman who had learned the hard way that sometimes the most powerful word in any language is simply no. At exactly 7 p.m., I sat at my kitchen island, phone in hand, heart racing despite my attempts to remain calm. I had prepared for this call like a business negotiation, notes arranged neatly beside me, talking points organized, even a glass of water within reach for when my throat inevitably tightened with emotion. The apartment around me stood as a testament to everything I had built without them: sleek furniture I had carefully selected, bookshelves filled with technical manuals and coding references, the expensive ergonomic chair my team had gifted me after my promotion. This space represented safety, achievement, independence, everything my parents had never believed I could create for myself. I dialed the number, each tone echoing in my quiet apartment. "Olivia?" My mother answered on the second ring, her voice a mix of relief and trepidation. "Thank you for calling." "Hello, Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Is Dad there too?" "Yes, you're on speaker. Olivia." My father's voice, gruffer than I remembered, older somehow. "It's good to hear from you." The awkward formality in his tone made my stomach clench. 5 years since he'd told me never to come back, and the best he could manage was, "Good to hear from you," as if I'd merely been away on vacation. "I understand Dad needs surgery," I said, bypassing the small talk neither of us seemed equipped to navigate. "Yes," my mother jumped in, clearly relieved to have a concrete topic. "His heart condition has worsened. The doctors found blockages in 3 arteries. He needs bypass surgery, but our insurance won't cover all of it." "Medicare only covers 80%, my father added. "The remaining 20% plus the deductible is more than we can manage on our current income." Current income. The phrase hung in the air, a reminder of their fallen circumstances. The failed bakery, the lost home, the part-time jobs they now cobbled together to survive. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, pencil poised over my notepad. $32,000, my mother said quietly. "We've already gone through our savings during the bakery's final years, and your Aunt Susan can only help so much." $32,000, a substantial sum, even with my comfortable salary. Not impossible, but not insignificant either. It would delay my home buying plans, reduce my investment contributions, impact the financial security I had worked so relentlessly to build. "I see," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "And you're asking me to cover this amount?" The silence that followed spoke volumes. They hadn't explicitly asked yet, perhaps hoping I would volunteer, sparing them the humiliation of having to beg the daughter they had disowned. "We wouldn't ask if there were any other options," my father finally said, his pride evident even through the phone line. "We've looked into payment plans, but the hospital wants most of it up front before scheduling the surgery." I took a sip of water, organizing my thoughts. "Before we discuss money, I think we need to address what happened 5 years ago." Another silence, heavier this time. "Olivia," my mother began, her voice placating. "That was a difficult time for everyone." "It was a difficult time that you and Dad made infinitely harder by throwing me out with nowhere to go," I interrupted, surprising myself with the calm clarity in my voice. I was 18 with 2 suitcases and no plan. "You chose to abandon the family business," my father said, defensive heat rising in his tone. "We had expectations." "No, Dad. You had ultimatums. There's a difference." I pressed my palms flat against the cool countertop, grounding myself. "I didn't choose to leave. You gave me an impossible choice. Sacrifice my future for a failing business or get out. That wasn't a choice. It was coercion. We were trying to save our livelihood." His voice rose, then abruptly cut off. In the background, I heard my mother murmuring something to him, probably reminding him of his blood pressure, of why they needed this call to go well. When he spoke again, his tone was measured. "Perhaps we handled it poorly." Perhaps. The understatement was almost laughable. "I spent that first night on a park bench," I said quietly. "Did you know that? Did you ever wonder where I went when you closed the door?" The shocked silence told me they hadn't. They had been so consumed by their own narrative of betrayal that they had never considered the reality of what they had done to their daughter. "Olivia, we didn't," my mother started. "No? Care? Either way, the result was the same." I took another sip of water. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, though you should. I'm telling you because I need you to understand what you're really asking. You're asking for financial help from someone you abandoned when she needed support the most." The silence stretched so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, my father spoke, his voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. We were wrong. 3 words. Simple, unadorned, and from a man who had never admitted error in all the years I'd known him, they landed with the weight of a meteor. Yes, I agreed. You were. Is that what you needed to hear? There was an edge to his question, the old defensiveness creeping back in. That we were wrong? Fine, we were wrong. Now about the surgery. This isn't a transaction, Dad, I said sharply. I'm not exchanging a reluctant apology for $32,000. I'm trying to establish whether there's anything left between us worth rebuilding. Of course there is, my mother interjected desperately. We're family. Family. I let the word hang there. Family doesn't discard people when they make choices you disagree with. Family doesn't enforce loyalty through threats and ultimatums. What you did wasn't family, it was control. We were scared, my mother admitted after a moment. The bakery was failing. We were facing the collapse of everything we'd built. When you chose to leave instead of help, it felt like the final betrayal. I was 18, I reminded her. It wasn't my responsibility to save a business that refused to adapt. It wasn't my job to sacrifice my education and future for your bad decisions. You always were stubborn, my father muttered. But there was something different in his tone. Not anger, but a reluctant recognition. I learned from the best, I replied, and for the first time in 5 years, I heard my father make a sound that might have been a chuckle. The tension shifted, not dissipating entirely, but transforming into something less brittle, more navigable. We've followed your career, you know, my mother said hesitantly. Susan's daughter Megan is friends with Zoe. She tells us things sometimes. Your graduation, your job. We've been proud. The admission caught me off guard. I had imagined them dismissing my success, or worse, never thinking about me at all. The idea that they had been tracking my progress from afar, feeling pride they had no right to claim, stirred complicated emotions. That doesn't change what happened, I said. No, my father agreed, surprising me again. It doesn't. But maybe it can be part of what happens next. I leaned back in my chair, considering. 5 years of building walls, of proving I didn't need them, of transforming hurt into determination. Could I now build a bridge across that carefully maintained distance? Did I even want to? I need to think about the money, I said finally. It's a significant amount, and I have my own financial goals. We understand, my mother said quickly, too quickly. Any help at all would be… But, I continued, cutting her off, I'm willing to discuss it further under certain conditions. What conditions? My father's wariness was evident. First, I need to see the medical bills and insurance documentation. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Of course, my mother agreed immediately. I can email everything tomorrow. Second, I want to explore other options before committing my own funds. Have you applied for hospital financial assistance? Looked into medical crowdfunding? Charitable organizations that help with cardiac care? We've tried some of that, my father said, a defensive edge returning to his voice. We're not completely helpless, Olivia. I didn't say you were, but I work with technology every day, Dad. There might be resources you don't know about. He made a non-committal sound that I chose to interpret as agreement. And third, I said, taking a deep breath, if I do help financially, it's not a gift. It's a loan with clear terms. Interest, payment schedule, everything in writing. A loan? My father's indignation flared. You would charge your own father interest when his life is at stake? Robert, my mother hissed. Yes, I would, I said calmly. Because that's how I ensure this transaction doesn't become another form of emotional leverage. Because that's how I protect the boundaries you never respected. And because that's how real help works in the adult world, with clarity and accountability. The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a precipice. Would they revert to type, lash out at my conditions, reinforce everything I believed about them? Or would they surprise me? That's fair, my father finally said, the words sounding as if they had been physically painful to produce. You have every right to protect yourself. I hadn't expected that. The knot of tension in my chest loosened slightly. I'll review the documentation when you send it, I said, and I'll let you know what I decide within a week. Thank you, Olivia, my mother said, her voice thick with emotion, for even considering this, for talking to us at all. The call ended shortly after, leaving me alone in my kitchen, emotionally drained but strangely clear-headed. I had faced the ghosts I'd been running from for 5 years and found them diminished, still, capable of stirring pain but no longer holding power over me. The next morning, as promised, my mother emailed a folder of medical documents and financial statements. I forwarded them to Zoe, who had become a hospital administrator after college and knew the healthcare system's labyrinthine pathways better than most. Want me to look for options they might have missed? She offered during our lunch video call. Please, I said, and be honest about whether the amount they're quoting makes sense. While Zoe reviewed the documents, I created a spreadsheet analyzing my own finances. If I did provide the full amount, it would mean postponing my home purchase by at least 2 years and significantly reducing my investment contributions. Not catastrophic, but a meaningful setback to the security I had worked so hard to build. 3 days later, Zoe called with her assessment. The medical costs are legitimate, she confirmed, but they've missed several potential assistance programs. The hospital has a financial aid program for patients over 65 that could cover up to 30% of their portion. And there's a cardiac care foundation that provides grants specifically for bypass surgeries. So they might not need the full $32,000 from me? Potentially much less, she agreed. Maybe $15,000 if they qualify for everything. I've compiled the application information. That evening, I sent my parents a detailed email outlining the assistance programs Zoe had identified, with links and application instructions. My father's response was brief. Thank you for researching this. We'll apply immediately. No defensiveness, no insistence that they had already tried everything. Just acknowledgement and action. Another small surprise. Over the next 2 weeks, I maintained a careful distance while they navigated the application processes. My mother sent occasional updates, brief and factual. My father remained mostly silent, though he had added his name alongside my mother's. In their email signature, a small but noticeable shift. Finally, the results came in. Between the hospital's financial assistance program and a grant from the Cardiac Foundation, they had secured coverage for just over half of the remaining costs. They would still need approximately $15,000 to proceed with the surgery. That night, I drafted a formal loan agreement. Clear, professional, with reasonable terms. A 5-year repayment period, minimal interest, enough to be legally binding but not punitive, and structured monthly payments they could feasibly manage on their limited income. I included provisions for hardship deferments if necessary, but maintained firm boundaries around communication and expectations. I stared at the completed document for a long time before sending it. Was I being too harsh? Too businesslike with the people who had given me life? Or was this precisely the framework we needed? A structure that acknowledged both obligation and autonomy, connection and boundaries. In the end, I attached the agreement to an email with a simple message. If these terms are acceptable, I can transfer the funds by the end of the week. Their response came the next morning. My mother's email address, but my father's distinctive writing style. The terms are acceptable. More than that, they are appropriate. You have built a life of competence and clarity that we failed to appreciate when you were younger. Perhaps it is not too late for us to learn from the daughter we underestimated. The agreement will be signed and returned today." Something shifted within me as I read those words. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first tentative roots of something that might eventually grow into understanding. They had seen me finally, not as an extension of their expectations, but as the person I had fought to become. The funds transferred, the agreement signed, the surgery scheduled. Our interactions remained careful, measured, but the hostile silence of the past 5 years had given way to something less broken. 2 days before the surgery, I received a text from my mother. "Your father is nervous about tomorrow. Would it help if you called?" I considered the request. Was this the beginning of old patterns reasserting themselves? The expectation that I would provide emotional support on demand? Or was it simply a mother acting as bridge between the two most stubborn people she knew? I chose to believe the latter and called that evening. "The surgeon has an excellent track record," I said after we had exhausted the safe topics of weather and hospital logistics. "The procedure is routine for someone with his experience." "That's what they keep telling me," my father said, his attempt at gruffness undermined by the anxiety evident in his voice. "You'll be fine," I told him, and was surprised to realize I meant it, not just as a platitude, but as a genuine hope. An awkward pause followed, then, "Olivia, there's something I need to say before tomorrow. In case—" "Don't," I interrupted. "You don't need to have a deathbed confession, Dad. The surgery is going to go well." "Nevertheless," he persisted, "I need to say this." I waited, suddenly tense. "I was wrong to throw you out," he said. Simply. Not just because you've succeeded beyond anything I could have imagined. I was wrong regardless of what happened afterward. No father should ever close the door on his child. The words I had needed to hear for 5 years, delivered without qualifiers or excuses. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I've had a lot of time to think since the bakery failed," he continued. "About what I tried to preserve, what I lost in the process. I held on to that business like it was my identity, like letting it go would erase who I was. I couldn't see that it was already gone, that the world had moved on while I was clinging to the past." His voice had taken on a reflective quality I had never heard before, free of the defensiveness that had characterized our relationship. "When you chose a different path, it felt like rejection of everything I valued. I couldn't see that you were adapting to reality while I was fighting it." He paused. "I'm proud of you, Olivia. Not because you're successful enough to help us now, but because you had the courage to build your own way when we failed to support you." I sat in my living room, phone pressed to my ear, unexpected tears threatening. 5 years of proving I didn't need their approval, their support, their love. And still, these words mattered. "I don't know if we can fix what happened," I admitted. "A lot of damage was done." "I know," he acknowledged. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, just for the chance to know the remarkable woman my daughter has become, if you're willing." I thought about the walls I had built, the distance I had maintained, the story I had told myself about who they were and what they wanted from me. Was I willing to revise that narrative? To open myself to the possibility that people, even parents, could change? "One step at a time," I offered. "Let's get through tomorrow first." The surgery went well. I took a rare day off work to sit with my mother in the waiting room, not quite comfortable, but no longer actively adversarial. When the surgeon emerged with news of success, her relief was palpable. She gripped my hand, and I let her. Recovery would take weeks. Rebuilding. What had been broken between us would take much longer, if it was possible at all. But as I drove home that evening, I realized that the loan agreement sitting in my files represented something unexpected. Not just a financial transaction, but a new foundation, built on clarity rather than unspoken expectations. on boundaries rather than obligation, on choice rather than coercion. The 18-year-old who had sat on a park bench with nowhere to go could never have imagined this resolution. She had been focused solely on survival, on proving her parents wrong, on building what they had tried to deny her. But the woman I had become understood something that frightened girl couldn't. That true independence wasn't just about financial self-sufficiency or professional success. It was about the freedom to choose connection on my own terms, to offer help without sacrificing boundaries, to acknowledge the past without being defined by it. The money I had loaned would help save my father's life. But the terms I had set, clear, fair, unambiguous, were saving something equally important: my right to define my own relationships, my own obligations, my own definition of family. 3 months after the surgery, I received the first loan. Payment, on time, in full, with a brief note. "Thank you for the second chance. We know it's more than we deserve." I filed the receipt carefully in my records, then opened my calendar. My mother had been sending tentative invitations to Sunday dinner for weeks. Perhaps it was time to accept one, not out of obligation, but as a deliberate choice. Not as the dutiful daughter returning to the fold, but as an independent woman, exploring the possibility of a new, more balanced relationship. After all, I was no longer a teenager with nowhere to go. I was a professional with options, resources, and most importantly, the power to set my own boundaries. If the dinner went poorly, I could leave, not to a park bench this time, but to the home and life I had built for myself. I typed a response. "This Sunday works for me. I'll bring dessert. Looking forward to catching up." As I pressed send, I felt none of the anxiety that had characterized our interactions for years. In its place was a quiet confidence. Not that everything would be magically healed, but that whatever happened, I could handle it. The girl on the park bench had needed to prove her parents wrong. The woman at the keyboard no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. That was the true victory, not in withholding help when asked, but in providing it without losing myself in the process. Not in rejecting connection, but in reclaiming it on my own terms. The loan would be repaid according to the schedule we had established. The emotional debts between us were more complex and would take longer to resolve, if they ever could be. But for the first time in 5 years, I was open to the possibility that the story wasn't finished yet. That new chapters could be written, not erasing the painful ones that came before, but perhaps adding context, growth, even healing. I closed my laptop and looked around the apartment I had created for myself. The visible proof of my journey from that park bench to here. Whatever came next with my parents, this space and the life it represented would remain mine. Hard-won. Self-created. Undeniable. And in that knowledge was a freedom more valuable than any amount of money could ever buy. 2 weeks after my father's successful surgery, I found myself parking in front of Aunt Susan's modest ranch-style home, gripping the steering wheel as I gathered my courage. This would be my first time seeing my parents face-to-face since the night they had thrown me out. The text messages and phone calls of the past month had been one thing. Physical presence was something else entirely. I had brought a cake from an upscale bakery, a peace offering of sorts, though the irony of bringing baked goods to former bakers wasn't lost on me. The weight of the box on my lap anchored me as I rehearsed what I might say, how I might react, when confronted with the physical reality of my aging parents. A tap on my car window startled me. Aunt Susan stood there, her familiar smile tinged with concern. I hadn't realized how long I'd been sitting in the driveway, frozen between past and present. "They're nervous too," she said as I stepped out of the car, cake box balanced carefully in my hands. "I'm not nervous," I lied, the automatic defense mechanism of a wounded child. She raised an eyebrow, seeing through me as she always had. Of course not. You just enjoy sitting in parked cars staring at nothing." Her gentle teasing broke the tension, and I managed a smile. Thanks for hosting this. Neutral territory helps. There's nothing neutral about my living room, she replied wryly. Your mother has rearranged my furniture twice since moving in. Says the feng shui was disrupting your father's recovery. The glimpse of my mother's familiar controlling tendencies was oddly comforting, a reminder that while circumstances had changed dramatically, core personalities remained. I would not be walking into a situation where strangers wore my parents' faces. As we approached the front door, Aunt Susan paused. They've changed, Olivia. The bakery failing, your father's health scare. It's humbled them. But they're still your parents with all the complicated history that entails. Be patient if you can. I nodded, throat suddenly tight. I'll try. The living room fell silent when I entered. My mother stood abruptly from the couch, hands fluttering uncertainly before settling at her sides. My father remained seated in a recliner, looking smaller than I remembered, a flannel blanket across his lap despite the warm spring day. Olivia, my mother's voice wavered. You look wonderful. I handed the cake box to Aunt Susan, buying time while I processed the scene before me. My mother had aged more than 5 years should account for. New lines etched around her eyes and mouth. Her hair fully gray now rather than the carefully maintained brown I remembered. My father's transformation was even more striking. Weight lost, color diminished. The robust baker replaced by a man clearly marked by illness and defeat. How are you feeling? I asked him, choosing the simplest, safest opening. Better every day, he replied, his voice stronger than it had been during our phone calls. The doctors say I'm recovering faster than expected. He's a terrible patient, my mother added, the familiar complaint carrying an undertone of relief. Won't take. His afternoon rest keeps trying to help with dinner. Some things never change, I observed, and was rewarded with a flash of my father's old stubborn grin. We settled into an awkward conversation over coffee and cake, navigating the surreal experience of small talk with people who had once been my entire world. Weather, local news, Aunt Susan's garden plans, neutral topics that allowed us to circle each other carefully, establishing this new dynamic. I studied them as we talked, noting the changes 5 years had wrought. Beyond the physical aging, there was something different in their bearing. The absolute certainty that had characterized my parents, the unwavering belief that their way was the only way, seemed diminished. In its place was a tentative quality, almost hesitant, as if they had learned the hard way that the ground beneath them was less solid than they had believed. Your apartment looks nice, my mother ventured. Eventually, from the background on our video call, I blinked, surprised by the direct reference to my life. It suits me. Good natural light for plants, close to work. Susan mentioned you're considering buying a home? This from my father, his tone carefully casual. The invisible weight of the loan agreement hung between us. We all knew that the money I had provided for his surgery had delayed those plans. Eventually, I said. The market's overheated right now anyway. Better to wait for a correction. He nodded, relief flashing briefly across his face. Smart thinking. Never buy at the peak. The businessman in him hadn't completely disappeared. Then, despite everything, I felt a flicker of something like connection. The echo of countless childhood conversations where he had dispensed financial wisdom I had absorbed like a sponge. Your colleague Zoe helped us navigate the insurance appeals, my mother said. She's been invaluable. You have good friends. I do, I agreed. I've been fortunate that way. The subtext was clear. I had built a support system to replace what they had taken away. My mother's eyes dropped to her coffee cup, acknowledging the gentle rebuke. We've made the first loan payment, my father said suddenly, ahead of schedule. I met his gaze directly. I know. I received it last week. We'll continue to pay on time, he assured me, Every month, without fail. I trust that you will." And strangely, I did. Not because they had proven themselves reliable, quite the opposite, but because the dynamic had shifted so fundamentally. They were now the ones seeking to prove themselves trustworthy. As the afternoon progressed, the conversation gradually became less stilted. Aunt Susan shared embarrassing stories about my parents' adjustment to living under her roof. Your mother alphabetized my spice rack while I was at work, drawing reluctant laughter from all of us. My father described his cardiac rehabilitation exercises with the same meticulous attention to detail he had once applied to bread recipes. My mother showed me photos of the container garden she had started on Aunt Susan's patio, a miniature version of the herb garden that had once supplied the bakery. It was in many ways an ordinary family visit, and in that ordinariness lay its extraordinary nature. 5 years of silence bridged not by grand declarations or dramatic reconciliations, but by the mundane exchange of daily life. Coffee cups and cake plates, weather reports and doctor's appointments. The currency of family, traded once again, after a long embargo. As the visit drew to a close, my father cleared his throat awkwardly. "We've been thinking," he began, glancing at my mother for support. "The loan payments. We want to add something to them each month." I frowned, confused. "The terms we agreed to are manageable for you. There's no need to strain your finances further." "Not money," my mother clarified. "A letter, each month, with the payment. Letters we should have written years ago, about things we should have said." "What kind of things?" I asked warily. My father shifted in his chair, discomfort evident. "Memories, apologies, things we've realized too late. Who you were before we stopped seeing you clearly. Who we were before the bakery became more important than our daughter." The unexpected proposal caught me off guard. In all my careful planning and boundary setting, I hadn't anticipated this. A gesture that acknowledged not just the financial debt, but the emotional one as well. "You don't have to read them," my mother added hurriedly. "You can throw them away if you want, but we need to write them, for ourselves as much as for you." I considered the proposal, turning it over like a strange artifact discovered unexpectedly. It wasn't what I had expected or asked for, yet somehow it felt right. A repayment plan for the other, deeper resources they had squandered. "Okay," I said finally. "I can't promise I'll read them right away, but I'll keep them." Relief softened my mother's features. "That's all we ask." As I prepared to leave, my father struggled to his feet, waving away my mother's concerned hand. "I'll walk you to your car." The short journey down Aunt Susan's front path took time, his steps careful and measured. We moved in silence until we reached my car, where he paused, breathing slightly labored from even this small exertion. "You've built a good life," he said, gesturing toward my car. "Nothing flashy, but new and reliable. A visible marker of financial stability." "Without any help from us." "I had help," I corrected him. "Just not from family. At least, not the family I was born into." He nodded, accepting the distinction. "I used to think family was blood and nothing else. The bakery was Evan's family. For 3 generations. So Evan's family was the bakery. Simple." He looked toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning its descent. I was wrong about many things. Coming from my father, this admission was seismic. The man who had built his identity on unyielding certainty was acknowledging fundamental error. "The bakery was just a business," I said quietly. "It could have adapted, changed. You chose to let it die rather than transform." "Yes." He turned, to face me fully. "And I nearly made the same mistake with something far more valuable than a business." The directness of his gaze, the simple acknowledgement, reached past the carefully constructed defenses I had maintained for 5 years. Not dissolving them entirely, but creating a small opening, a possibility. "I don't know what happens next," I admitted. I don't know if we can rebuild anything meaningful from here." "Neither do I," he agreed. "But I'd like to try. Not because you saved my life with the loan, though I'm grateful beyond words for that, but because I've finally realized what I lost when I closed that door 5 years ago." I got into my car, emotion threatening to overwhelm the composure I had maintained throughout the visit. "I'll call next week," I promised. "We can talk about the letters then." As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. My father stood watching, a diminished figure on the front lawn, hand raised in farewell. Not the imposing patriarch, who had once ruled our family with stubborn conviction, but an aging man facing the consequences of his choices. And I was no longer the rejected daughter, desperate for approval and acceptance. I was a woman who had built a life on her own terms, strong enough to extend help without sacrificing boundaries, secure enough to consider reconnection without fear of being diminished. The first letter arrived exactly 1 month later, tucked into an envelope with the loan payment check. My mother's handwriting on the outer envelope, my father's on the sealed inner one marked simply Letter 1. I set it aside on my desk, not yet ready to open this portal to the past. 3 days later, curiosity overcame caution. The single page inside contained my father's distinctive blocky handwriting, less steady than I remembered, but still instantly recognizable. "Olivia," it began. "I remember the science fair when you were 9. You built that computer program that predicted weather patterns based on historical data. I didn't understand it, didn't try to. The bakery was my world, and I couldn't see beyond it to what excited you. While other parents were marveling at their children's potato clocks and volcanoes, I was thinking about the next day's bread orders, barely glancing at the project you had spent weeks perfecting. You won first place. The judges said your project was years beyond your grade level. I didn't attend the award ceremony. There was a special order that couldn't wait, I told myself. But the truth was, I was intimidated by your intelligence, by the way you moved so confidently in a world I couldn't comprehend. It was easier to focus on what I understood, flour and yeast, rise times and temperatures, than to acknowledge that my daughter was already moving beyond the boundaries of my expertise. You deserved a father who celebrated your brilliance instead of feeling threatened by it, who could set aside his own insecurities to champion your unique gifts. I failed you then, as I would continue to fail you in ways large and small, culminating in the unforgivable night when I chose a failing business over my remarkable daughter. The bakery is gone now. All those years of tradition, of family history, reduced to a going out of business sign and auction notices. But you, the child I failed to properly see, you have flourished beyond anything I could have imagined. There is a bitter irony there that I live with daily. This is not an attempt to excuse what I did. There is no excuse. But perhaps in understanding my failures, both of us can find a way forward, even if that way never leads back to what was lost. With regret and with hope, Dad. I set the letter down, tears blurring my vision. The memory he had chosen to begin with, not the dramatic moment of rupture, but an earlier, smaller failure that had presaged it, spoke volumes about his new self-awareness. He had traced the fracture lines back to their origins, recognizing that the final break had been years in the making. Over the next several months, more letters arrived with each payment. My mother began sending her own, alternating with my father's. Where his were reflective and often painfully self-critical, hers were softer, filled with small details of family history I had never known. She wrote about her own parents' disapproval when she chose to marry into the Evans Bakery family instead of pursuing college. About the dreams she had set aside to support my father's inherited business. About how she had projected her own regrets onto me when I chose education over family obligation, seeing my escape as a reminder of the path she hadn't taken. I wanted to protect you from my mistakes, she wrote in her third letter. Instead, I nearly forced you to repeat them. The letters became a strange kind of therapy for all of us. For my parents, they were an exercise in honest self-reflection, in articulating regrets too painful to voice aloud. For me, they offered context for wounds that had never fully healed, filling in gaps in a family narrative I had only partially understood. I didn't respond to them directly, but gradually, our occasional phone calls became more frequent. Brief text exchanges evolved into deeper conversations. My monthly dinner visits to Aunt Susan's house became bi-weekly, then weekly. 6 months after my father's surgery, they moved out of Aunt Susan's home and into a small apartment closer to my side of the city. The gesture wasn't lost on me. They were literally moving toward me, making themselves more accessible without pressuring for increased contact. The loan payments continued, each one on time, each one accompanied by a letter. The practical transaction we had established became a framework for something less tangible but equally important. The deliberate reconstruction of trust, built payment by payment, letter by letter, conversation by conversation. 1 year after the surgery, I invited them to my apartment for dinner. The first time they would see the home I had created for myself, the physical manifestation of the independence I had fought for. "It's so bright," my mother said as she entered, taking in the large windows, the carefully arranged furniture, the bookshelves filled with technical references and science fiction novels. "So perfectly you." My father moved more slowly through the space, studying the framed certificates on my wall, my degree, professional certifications, awards from coding competitions. "I don't understand half of what these represent," he admitted, "but I'm proud of every one of them." The dinner wasn't perfect. Old patterns emerged occasionally. My mother's instinct to take over in the kitchen, my father's momentary flashes of stubbornness, my own ingrained defensiveness. But we navigated these moments with a new awareness, catching ourselves, adjusting course. As they prepared to leave, my father handed me an envelope, not the usual loan payment letter, but something different. "We've been talking," he said, glancing at my mother, "about the future, our future, specifically." I opened the envelope to find a brochure for a retirement community on the outskirts of the city. "We've put down a deposit on a small unit," my mother explained. "It's affordable, has good medical facilities on site for your father's ongoing care, and it's close enough that visits would be easier." The unspoken question hung in the air. Would there be visits? Was the fragile bridge we were building strong enough to sustain ongoing connection? "It looks nice," I said carefully. "When would you move?" 3 months, my father replied, "assuming everything goes as planned with the financing." I nodded, processing this new development. They were putting down roots near me, making a long-term commitment to whatever relationship we were slowly reconstructing. "I could help you move," I offered. "I'm pretty good at organizing things these days." The relief on their faces was evident. This small practical offer represented something larger, a willingness to incorporate them into my future in some capacity, still bounded by careful limits, but present. As they left, my mother hugged me briefly, our first physical contact since the reconciliation had begun. My father simply nodded, respecting the boundaries I had established, understanding that for me, physical distance remained an important part of emotional safety. That night, after they had gone, I sat in my quiet apartment reviewing the journey of the past year. From the desperate text message asking for financial help to this moment of cautious planning for ongoing connection. From the raw hurt of abandonment to the measured reconstruction of relationship on new, more equal terms. The loan agreement sat in my desk drawer, payments methodically recorded, the terms unchanged. But alongside it now was a growing collection of letters. An emotional accounting as meticulous as the financial one. A different kind of debt being repaid word by word. I couldn't yet call what I felt forgiveness. The wounds were too deep, the history too complex for such a simple resolution. But I had discovered something unexpected in the wreckage of what had been broken, the possibility of building something new. Not a restoration of what was lost, but the creation of something different. A relationship between adults who had hurt each other, but were trying, imperfectly but sincerely, to do better. The 18-year-old girl on the park bench could never have imagined this outcome. In her pain and fear, she could envision only two possibilities: complete estrangement or total capitulation. The binary thinking of the wounded, with no room for the complex middle ground where most human relationships actually exist. But the woman I had become understood nuance. Understood that reconciliation didn't require erasing boundaries. That helping my parents financially didn't mean surrendering the independence I had fought for. That acknowledging their efforts to change didn't negate the harm they had caused. I picked up my father's most recent letter, rereading the closing lines. I used to believe that family meant unconditional loyalty. Now I understand that true family requires something harder: unconditional respect. Not blind obedience, but genuine recognition of each other's separate humanity. I'm still learning what that means in practice. Thank you for giving me the chance to learn. Perhaps that was the most profound change of all, not just in our circumstances or in our communication, but in our fundamental understanding of what family could mean. Not a hierarchy of authority and obligation, but a constellation of individuals, connected but distinct, each with their own light to cast. The loan would be repaid in full over the coming years. The emotional debts between us might never be completely resolved. But in the space between those realities, we were finding a way forward. Step by careful step, letter by honest letter, building not what was, but what could be. And for now, that was enough. 18 months after my father's surgery, I stood in the doorway of their new apartment at Willow Creek Retirement Community, watching as they arranged and rearranged the few belongings they had managed to keep through their financial collapse. The one-bedroom unit was modest but comfortable. A bright living room with a small balcony, a kitchenette that my mother had already organized with meticulous efficiency, and a bedroom furnished with the only pieces they had retained from our old home: the mahogany dresser that had been my grandmother's and the matching nightstands. "What do you think?" my mother asked, her nervous glance seeking approval. "Is the sofa better here or against the other wall?" "Here catches the morning light," I replied, easing into this strange new dynamic where my opinion held weight in their decisions. "Better for Dad's reading." My father looked up from the box of books he was unpacking. "Good thinking. Your mother won't admit it, but her eyesight isn't what it used to be either." "Says the man who needed 3 tries to read the thermostat yesterday," my mother retorted. But the familiar bickering now carried an undercurrent of affection rather than the tense resentment I remembered from my teenage years. I moved to help my father with the books, removing them carefully from the box and arranging them on the small bookshelf. Most were familiar: baking references, historical novels, the gardening guides my mother had collected. But one caught my eye: Coding for Beginners. It was new, the spine uncracked. I held it up questioningly, and my father shrugged, a hint of embarrassment coloring his face. "Thought I might try to understand what you do. Probably too complex for an old baker, but..." He trailed off, busying himself with another box. The simple gesture, this attempt to enter my world after so many years of expecting me to remain in his, struck me with unexpected force. I placed the book carefully on the shelf, making sure it was easily accessible. "It's actually a good introduction. If you have questions, you can always ask me." He nodded, not meeting my eyes, but I caught the slight smile that softened his expression. We worked together through the afternoon, establishing their new home in this community designed for seniors with modest means. The monthly loan payments had made their budget tight, But the combination of Social Security, my father's small pension from a job he'd held before the bakery, and part-time work my mother had found as a receptionist at a local garden center allowed them to manage. As we arranged the kitchen, my mother directing, my father and I executing her precise instructions, I marveled at how we had arrived at this point. The monthly letters had become a bridge across the gulf of hurt and misunderstanding, each one revealing another piece of our shared history from their perspective, each one acknowledging another failure or regret. Initially, I had read them with detached analysis, protecting myself from their emotional impact. But over time, as the collection grew, patterns emerged that softened my resistance. I began to see my parents not merely as the architects of my abandonment, but as flawed humans shaped by their own histories, making terrible mistakes from places of fear rather than malice. This understanding didn't erase what they had done or magically heal the wound of being discarded. But it created context, nuance, a more complex picture than the black and white narrative of villain and victim I had constructed in the immediate aftermath of being thrown out. "Dinner's almost ready," my mother announced, interrupting my reflections. She had insisted on cooking despite my offer to order takeout, claiming that a proper first meal would set the energy for their new home. We gathered around the small dining table, a housewarming gift from Aunt Susan, and for a moment, the scene felt surreally normal, as if the 5-year rupture had never happened. Then my father cleared his throat and raised his water glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, "to new beginnings, and to Olivia, without whom I wouldn't be here to see this day." My mother raised her glass, eyes shining. "To Olivia." I lifted my own glass, uncomfortable with the acknowledgement but recognizing its importance to them. "To new beginnings." As we ate, conversation flowed more easily than I would have thought possible 2 years ago. My father discussed his cardiac rehabilitation progress. My mother shared gossip about the neighbors they had already met, and I offered updates on my work projects. Surface-level exchange, perhaps, but conducted with a careful attention that acknowledged its fragility. "We received a letter from Noah last week," my mother mentioned as we cleared the dishes. "He's considering a visit when his deployment ends next month." My brother. After cutting contact with our parents years before I had, he had maintained his distance even as I cautiously rebuilt connections. We spoke occasionally, brief calls on birthdays and holidays, but he remained skeptical of my evolving relationship with our parents. "That's unexpected," I said carefully. "How do you feel about it?" My father set down the plate he was drying. "Nervous, hopeful. We've failed both our children, but at least with you, we've had the chance to acknowledge that failure. Noah hasn't given us that opportunity." "He might now," I offered. "People change. Circumstances change." I gestured around the apartment, the physical embodiment of how dramatically their lives had transformed. Later, as I prepared to leave, my mother pressed a small gift bag into my hands. "A housewarming gift for you too," she explained, "since you helped make this possible." At home, I opened the package to find a delicate ceramic planter, hand-painted with intricate botanical designs. Nestled inside was a note in my mother's handwriting. "For new growth. Thank you for allowing us back into your life, even with careful boundaries. You have taught us more about strength and dignity than we ever taught you." I placed the planter on my windowsill, not yet ready to fill it, but acknowledging the symbolism of its presence. Empty vessels waiting to nurture something new, much like the carefully structured relationship we were attempting to build. The following week brought the 18th loan payment, and with it, the 18th letter, this one from my mother, continuing their chronological reconstruction of our family history. "After your brother left for the military," she wrote, "you became both more essential to the bakery and more isolated within our family. We leaned on you too heavily, expecting You to fill the gaps Noah left while ignoring the mounting evidence that you were forging your own path. Your programming projects, your advanced placement classes, your quiet determination to create a different future. We saw these as distractions from family duty, not as the clear indicators they were. The morning you received your college acceptance letter, I found you sitting on the back steps crying. Not from joy, as you should have been, but from conflict. You knew even then that we would make you choose, that we would not celebrate this achievement but see it as betrayal. What kind of parents make their child weep over success? What kind of mother witnesses her daughter's tears and thinks only of how those plans disrupt her own expectations? I have replayed that morning countless times, imagining a different response. One where I sat beside you, acknowledged your accomplishment, helped you plan for that future instead of subtly undermining it at every turn. The path that might have led to a natural, healthy separation rather than the violent rupture we eventually caused. Each time your father and I write these letters, we peel back another layer of our failures, hoping to eventually reach something worth salvaging. Thank you for giving us the chance to try. I folded the letter carefully, adding it to the growing collection in my desk drawer. The emotional archaeology they were conducting, excavating the past to understand how we had arrived at that breaking point, mirrored my own journey of processing what had happened and why. Noah's visit the following month added another layer of complexity to this evolving family narrative. I met him for coffee the day after his arrival, our first face-to-face conversation in nearly 3 years. "You look good, Liv," he said, studying me across the table. "Success suits you." "You look tired," I replied honestly. My brother's military career had aged him, lines etched around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a wariness in his posture that spoke of hard-earned vigilance. 18-hour flights will do that." He sipped his coffee, watching me over the rim. "So, you're talking to them again." Not a question, a flat statement requiring explanation. "Yes, on my terms, with clear boundaries. It's a work in progress." He nodded, absorbing this without visible reaction. "And the loan? Mom mentioned? Something about helping with Dad's medical bills." I explained the arrangement, the formal agreement, the monthly payments, the accompanying letters. Letters. He set down his cup, eyebrows raised. Didn't take them for the introspective type. "People change," I said again, echoing my statement to our parents, especially when they lose everything they built their identity around. "The bakery." He made a dismissive gesture. "That damn bakery that was always more important than anything else." "It's gone now," I said quietly. "Along with the house, their savings, the future they had planned. They're living in a retirement community on a strict budget, working part-time, jobs in their 60s to make ends meet." "Karma's a bitch," Noah observed, but the expected satisfaction was missing from his tone. Instead, there was something almost like regret. "It's not about karma," I countered. "It's about consequences. Choices have consequences, theirs and ours." He studied me for a long moment. "You've gotten philosophical in your old age, little sister." "I've had a lot of time to think about family, about what it means, what it should be, what it can become when the original version fails." The conversation shifted then, to his military experiences, my career developments, the lives we had built separately from our family of origin and from each other. By the time we parted, something had eased between us. Not quite closeness, but a mutual recognition of shared history and divergent responses to that history. "I'm seeing them tomorrow," he said as we prepared to leave. Not sure what I'll say. "You don't have to say anything," I advised. "Just listen. See who they are now, not just who they were then." His visit with our parents was brief but civil, according to my mother's cautious text afterward. "A start," she wrote. Thank you for encouraging him to come. The delicate ecosystem of our reforming family continued to evolve over the following months. My weekly visits to their apartment became fixtures in our schedules. Noah began calling them monthly. Short conversations focused primarily on practical matters, but communication nonetheless. The loan payments continued, each one a tangible reminder of both obligation and opportunity, each accompanying letter, another thread in the complex tapestry of acknowledgement and accountability they were weaving. 2 years after my father's surgery, as I drove to their apartment for our usual Sunday dinner, I received an unexpected call from him. "Olivia, are you on your way?" His voice sounded odd, strained, but with an undercurrent of excitement. "About 10 minutes out. Is everything okay?" "Yes, fine. Just, we have something to discuss when you arrive. Nothing bad," he added hastily. "Just important." When I arrived, they were sitting side by side on the sofa, an envelope between them on the coffee table. "What's going on?" I asked, taking the armchair across from them, suddenly wary despite my father's assurance. My mother glanced at him, then took a deep breath. "We received some unexpected news yesterday. Your father's cousin Martin passed away last month." "I'm sorry," I said automatically, though I barely remembered this distant relative who had moved overseas decades ago. "We weren't close," my father acknowledged, "but apparently he never had children, and his will. Well, he left us a small inheritance." I raised my eyebrows, surprised. "How small is small?" $48,000, my mother replied, "after taxes and fees." The amount registered with immediate significance. It was slightly less than what remained on their loan to me, the medical debt that had been scheduled for full repayment over the next 3 years. My father picked up the envelope and extended it toward me. "We want to pay off the remainder of the loan. In full, now." I took the envelope, conflicting emotions surging. The practical financial advisor in me recognized the logical solution. Clearing debt was always mathematically sound. But another part of me hesitated. The loan had created a structure for our reconnection, a framework of obligation and reliability that had facilitated the rebuilding of trust. What would happen to that carefully constructed scaffolding if the financial connection was suddenly removed? "You don't have to do this," I said slowly. "The payment plan is working fine." "We know," my mother said. "But we want to. Not to erase the obligation. We know that can never be fully repaid, but to demonstrate our commitment to making things right in every way possible." I opened the envelope to find a cashier's check for the exact remaining balance of the loan, down to the penny. "We'd like to continue the letters," my father added, watching my reaction carefully. "Even without the payments, if that's okay with you." The offer revealed their true understanding of what the monthly exchange had become. Not just a financial transaction, but a commitment to ongoing honest communication, to the difficult, necessary work of rebuilding relationship from the ashes of what they had destroyed. "I'd like that," I said quietly. We finalized the loan repayment that afternoon, the formal acknowledgement that the financial debt had been satisfied. I updated the agreement with a simple notation: paid in full, October 12, 2023. But as we shared dinner afterward, the conversation flowing more easily than it had in years, I recognized that the other, deeper debts between us would require much longer to address, perhaps a lifetime of letter writing, of careful honesty, of setting and respecting boundaries. 3 days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox, the first independent of any loan payment. My father's handwriting on the envelope, dated like all the others in their chronological reconstruction of our family history. "With the financial obligation now fulfilled," he wrote, "I find myself reflecting on the concept of debt itself, what we owe each other, what can be repaid, and what cannot. The money you lent us saved my physical heart. These letters are an..." attempt to address the damage we did to a different kind of heart, the emotional center of our family that we fractured through years of prioritizing the wrong things. I used to believe that family obligation was a one-way street. Children owed parents respect, obedience, continuation of legacy. I never considered that parents owed their children at least as much: support, acceptance, the freedom to forge their own paths. When you stood in our kitchen that last morning, telling us you were going to college regardless of our wishes, I saw only defiance. I couldn't recognize the courage it took to claim your own future in the face of our disapproval. When I told you to leave and not come back, I thought I was asserting necessary parental authority. I couldn't see that I was severing the most important bond in my life out of wounded pride and fear of change. The money has been repaid in full, but this other debt, the debt of recognition, of genuine seeing, that will take much longer to address. I commit to continuing that work for as long as you'll allow it. I sat at my kitchen island, the letter open before me, struck by how far we had come from that desperate phone call 2 years ago, from financial crisis to medical emergency to tentative reconnection to this ongoing process of genuine reconciliation. The 18-year-old who had sat on a park bench with nowhere to go could never have imagined this outcome. In her fear and hurt, the only victory she could envision was financial success that would prove her parents wrong, accomplishment as the ultimate revenge. But the woman I had become understood that true victory lay not in proving them wrong, but in becoming so secure in my own worth that their validation was no longer necessary for my well-being, that I could choose connection not from need or obligation, but from a position of strength and clear-eyed compassion. The following Sunday, as we shared coffee on their small balcony overlooking the community garden, my father mentioned that he had started working through the coding book I had found during their move. Harder than I expected, he admitted. But fascinating, how it all fits together. The logic of it. That's what drew me to programming initially, I told him. The way everything connects. How systems build on each other to create something functional. He nodded, considering this. Like relationships, maybe, built on consistent patterns, reliable responses, breaking when the logic fails. The insight surprised me. This connection between my professional world and our personal history that I had never articulated, even to myself. Yes, I agreed. And like code, relationships can be debugged, improved, optimized over time, if everyone commits to the process. My mother joined us carrying fresh coffee. What are we talking about so seriously out here? Systems? My father and I said simultaneously, then exchanged startled glances that melted into cautious smiles. Well, while you two were discussing systems, she said, pouring coffee, I've been thinking about Thanksgiving. It's only a month away, and this place is too small for a proper dinner. I caught the question beneath her statement, the careful, unspoken invitation. My apartment has plenty of room, I offered, and a decent kitchen. You could come there. I hesitated, then added, I could invite Noah, too, if he's stateside. The surprise and hope that bloomed across their faces confirmed that despite all our careful rebuilding, they had not expected this step, this invitation into my personal space for a family holiday. We'd like that very much, my mother said, softly. I'll make rolls, my father added. If that's okay, not the same without proper bread. I'd like that, I agreed, realizing as I said it that I meant it, that I wanted this small reclamation of tradition, this echo of the baker he had been incorporated into the new relationship we were forming. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the strange, circular journey we had traveled. From the family bakery that had been the center of their universe and the source of our estrangement, to my father's homemade rolls as a single thread of continuity in our new, reimagined connection. The future remained uncertain, the rebuilding incomplete. The damage done could never be fully erased. only incorporated into a new understanding that acknowledged both harm and healing. But for the first time in years, I could imagine a path forward that included them. Not as the all-powerful parents of my childhood or the desperate strangers who had reached out for financial rescue, but as flawed, evolving humans worthy of the second chance they were working so hard to honor. The loan had been repaid in full. The deeper reconciliation remained a work in progress. And in that ongoing process, that commitment to honest communication and respectful boundaries lay the true resolution. Not perfect, not complete, but real in a way that perfect endings rarely are. 3 years after my father's surgery, I sat at my desk reviewing an email from our company's HR department. After 5 years with Horizon Tech, I had been offered a significant promotion, senior development manager with a substantial salary, increase and expanded responsibilities. The opportunity represented everything I had worked for since those desperate days after being thrown out: stability, recognition, advancement. My finger hovered over the accept offer button when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Don't forget dinner tonight. Your father is making his lasagna. Noah might video call if his schedule permits." The simple domestic message, so normal, so ordinary, struck me with the full weight of contrast between my life now and where I had been 3 years ago. Back then, a text from my mother would have sent me into an emotional tailspin. Now it was just Thursday, and family dinner was part of my routine. I confirmed I'd be there, then turned back to the promotion offer. The additional income would accelerate my financial goals, the house I had been saving for, the investment portfolio I had been carefully building. I clicked accept and felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with proving my worth to anyone else. This achievement was mine alone, earned through consistent effort and professional growth. When I arrived at my parents' apartment, that evening, the familiar scent of tomato sauce and herbs filled the air. My father, wearing the kiss the cook apron I had given him last Christmas, a joke that would have been unthinkable years earlier, was transferring a bubbling lasagna from the oven to the counter. "Perfect timing," he said, nodding toward the table already set for 3. "Your mother just stepped out to bring Mrs. Abernathy her mail. She should be back any minute." I placed the bottle of wine I'd brought on the table and moved to help him serve. These evening meals had evolved from awkward, careful interactions to something approaching comfortable routine. Not the strained family dinners of my childhood, where conversation revolved around the bakery's demands and my brothers and my perceived shortcomings, but a different kind of gathering. One built on the foundation of honest communication we had established through those monthly letters, through the careful rebuilding of trust that had accompanied each loan payment. "I accepted the promotion today," I mentioned as we arranged garlic bread in a basket. My father looked up, genuine pleasure lighting his features. "The management position? Olivia, that's wonderful. We should celebrate properly." The uncomplicated pride in his voice still surprised me sometimes. This new version of my father, who could recognize achievements that had nothing to do with his own world or expectations. "The wine is my celebration," I said, nodding toward the bottle. "Nothing too extravagant." "Nonsense. This calls for something special." He opened a drawer and pulled out a small, carefully wrapped package. "We were saving this for your birthday next month, but this seems like the right moment." I unwrapped the gift slowly, revealing a slender box from a local jeweler. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay a delicate silver pendant, a miniature computer with a tiny green gemstone set as its screen. "Your mother found someone who makes custom jewelry," my father explained, watching my reaction carefully. "We thought, well, it seemed fitting." The gift represented more than just a celebration of my promotion. It was an acknowledgement of the path I had chosen, the very path that had once created the rupture between us. In accepting and even celebrating this symbol of my career, they were completing a circle of recognition that had been broken for years. "It's perfect," I said, swallowing past the sudden tightness in my throat. Thank you. My mother returned. Then, and the moment shifted into the practical business of serving dinner and opening wine. But as my father explained about the early gift, and my mother helped me fasten the pendant around my neck, I felt something settle into place. Another piece of the complex reconciliation we had been constructing one careful step at a time. Over lasagna, we discussed my new position, my father's volunteer work teaching basic baking skills at the community center, and my mother's promotion to assistant manager at the garden center. Normal family conversation, unmarked by the tension and resentment that had characterized our interactions for so long. After dinner, as promised, Noah called from his military base overseas. These video chats had become part of our evolving family routine. Monthly check-ins where my brother maintained careful distance while gradually allowing more substantial connection. Tonight, after the usual updates and light conversation, he shared unexpected news. I'm considering not re-enlisting when my term ends in February, he said, his image slightly pixelated on the screen. Looking at civilian options, maybe using my GI Bill to finish college. The announcement clearly caught our parents by surprise. That's a significant change, my father said carefully. What kind of civilian work are you considering? Noah hesitated. Actually, I've been talking with Olivia about possibilities in the tech sector. Security systems, specifically. There's a program for veterans that provides specialized training. All eyes turned to me, and I nodded confirmation. We've been discussing it for a couple of months. Noah has a strong background in security. Protocols from his military work. It translates well to digital security. The fact that my brother and I had been having these conversations without involving our parents might once have triggered defensiveness or hurt. But the careful rebuilding of our family relationships had established new patterns. Recognition that adult children had independent connections and plans, that parents weren't entitled to know everything or control outcomes. That sounds promising, my mother said, genuine interest in her voice. Would you be moving back to this area? If the right opportunity comes up, Noah replied non-committally. I'm keeping options open right now. The conversation continued, exploring possibilities, without pressure, acknowledging this potential new chapter without attempting to control its direction. By the time we ended the call, an unspoken understanding had settled among us. If Noah did return, our reconstructed family dynamic would have room for him to define his own terms of engagement. Later, as I prepared to leave, my father handed me an envelope. This month's letter, he said. Though it's getting harder to find new things to say after all this time. I smiled, tucking the envelope into my bag. Maybe that's progress, when you've examined so much of the past that you start running out of material. He considered. This had tilted thoughtfully. Perhaps. Or maybe it means we need to focus more on the present and future instead of just excavating the past. His observation struck me as profoundly insightful. This recognition that while understanding, what had happened between us was necessary. At some point, healing required shifting focus from retrospection to current experience and future possibility. I think you're right, I agreed. The letters have been healing, but maybe they're evolving into something else now. Like what? I shrugged. I'm not sure yet, but I'm open to finding out. That night, reading their latest letter, I noticed the shift my father had articulated. Instead of another deep dive into past failures, the letter focused on observations about our current relationship, reflections on how far we had come, tentative hopes for what might lie ahead. We've spent 3 years conducting what feels like an archaeological excavation of our family history, my mother wrote in her distinctive flowing script. Digging through layers of mistakes and misunderstandings, cataloging the artifacts of our failures. That work has been necessary and clarifying. But perhaps it's time to put down the shovels and begin the equally important work of construction. building something new on the foundation of understanding we've established. The metaphor resonated, capturing exactly what had been evolving in our relationship. We had spent years examining the collapse of what had been. Maybe it was indeed time to focus on creating what could be. With this perspective in mind, I found myself approaching our interactions differently over the following weeks. Rather than measuring each exchange against the painful history we had explored in their letters, I began experiencing our relationship more in the present moment, appreciating the genuine effort they made to understand my world, acknowledging the ways they had grown and changed. A month after my promotion, as autumn painted the community garden in rich shades of amber and gold, my father suffered a minor setback in his recovery. Not another heart attack, but chest pains that sent him back to the hospital for observation. The episode proved to be anxiety-related rather than cardiac, but it served as a reminder of his ongoing vulnerability. I took a rare sick day from work to accompany my mother to the hospital. As we sat in the waiting room while doctors ran their tests, she reached for my hand, her fingers cool and slightly trembling. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I know you have important responsibilities at work." "This is important, too," I replied simply. Her eyes filled with tears. "There was a time when you wouldn't have come, when you would have had every right to ignore our call." "There was," I acknowledged, "but that's not where we are now." She squeezed my hand, understanding all that remained unspoken in that simple statement. We weren't the same people who had fractured so completely 5 years ago. The painful work of accountability and rebuilding had transformed us all, not erasing the past, but creating a present where new choices were possible. The doctors released my father that evening with a clean bill of cardiac health, but a recommendation for stress management techniques. As I drove them back to their apartment, he sat quietly in the passenger seat, visibly shaken by the reminder of his mortality. "I had a lot of time to think, sitting in that hospital bed," he said finally as we neared their community. "About what matters, what doesn't, about where I've put my energy all these years." My mother and I remained silent, giving him space to continue. "The bakery consumed my entire identity for decades," he continued. "When it failed, I thought I had lost everything that defined me. Then when my heart nearly gave out, I realized that what actually mattered, family, was what I had damaged most severely through my stubborn pride." He turned slightly in his seat to look at me. "I used to believe legacy meant carrying on, the family business. Now I understand that real legacy is about relationships, the connections we nurture, the trust we build or break, the love we extend or withhold." The simple wisdom of his statement, earned through painful experience, rather than easy platitude, touched something deep within me. My father, who had once been so rigid in his definitions of family obligation and success, had undergone a fundamental transformation in how he understood what truly mattered. "That's a good revelation to have," I said softly. "Better late than never," he replied, a hint of his old dry humor returning, though earlier would have saved us all a lot of grief. When we arrived at their apartment, I helped settle my father in his recliner while my mother prepared tea. The domestic routine felt natural now, no longer freighted with the awkwardness and tension that had characterized our early reconciliation efforts. "Will you stay for a while?" my mother asked, setting down the teapot. "We could watch that British baking show your father pretends to hate, but actually gets very invested in." I smiled at the small glimpse into their private dynamic. This detail about my father that I wouldn't have known during our years of estrangement. "I'd like that." As we sat together in their small living room, watching amateur bakers struggle with technical challenges while my father muttered expert commentary, under his breath I was struck by how ordinary and yet extraordinary the moment felt. Family watching television together, the most mundane of activities, and yet one that would have been unimaginable during the years of complete separation. This was the true nature of our reconciliation, I realized. Not dramatic declarations or grand gestures, but the quiet rebuilding of everyday connection. The ability to share simple moments without the weight of unaddressed harm hovering over every interaction. The loan that had begun our tentative reconnection was now 2/3 repaid. Each monthly payment arrived precisely on schedule, accompanied by a letter that had evolved from painful excavation of the past to thoughtful reflection on our ongoing journey. The financial obligation would eventually end, but the commitment to honest communication it had fostered had become integrated into the fabric of our new relationship. 2 weeks after my father's hospital scare, Noah called with surprising news. He had secured early release from his military commitment and would be returning stateside within the month. More unexpectedly, he had applied for and been accepted to the Veterans Technology Program we had discussed, the one located just 30 minutes from where our parents now lived. "I'll need a place to stay temporarily," he said, his usual self-sufficiency tinged with hesitation. "Just until I find an apartment? I was thinking maybe with you?" The request represented a significant shift in our sibling dynamic. Noah had always been fiercely independent, maintaining distance not just from our parents but from me as well during the years following our respective departures from the family home. "Of course," I agreed immediately. "My spare room is yours, for as long as you need." There was a pause then. "I might also see Mom and Dad while I'm there, not moving in with them or anything," he added hastily. "Just seeing where things stand now." "I think that would be good," I said carefully. "They've changed, Noah. Not perfectly, not completely, but meaningfully. So I gather from our calls." Another pause. "You've changed too, Liv. There's a steadiness to you now, a certainty that's different from before." His observation surprised me. I hadn't considered how my own evolution might appear to someone who had known me during the raw, desperate period, immediately after being thrown out. But he was right. The journey from park bench to professional success had transformed me just as significantly as financial collapse and health crises had transformed our parents. "We've all changed," I acknowledged. "Maybe that's what makes reconnection possible." Noah's arrival 3 weeks later marked another significant milestone in our family's ongoing story of fracture and repair. I met him at the airport, immediately struck by how military service had both hardened and matured my once restless brother. The lanky teenager who had escaped our parents' expectations years before me had become a disciplined, observant man who carried himself with quiet confidence. "Nice place," he commented as we entered my apartment. "Very you. Organized but not rigid. Tech-forward but still warm." I showed him to the spare room, already prepared with fresh linens and space cleared in the closet. "Make yourself at home. Stay as long as you need." He set down his duffel bag, surveying the room before turning to me with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I've been thinking about what you said, about all of us changing. I'm not sure I'm ready to fully reconnect with Mom and Dad, but I'm open to taking small steps." "Small steps work," I assured him. "That's how we've rebuilt things, one careful step at a time." The first of those steps came the following weekend, when Noah agreed to join me for Sunday dinner at our parents' apartment. The initial moments were awkward. My mother fighting tears at the sight of her son after so many years. My father struggling to find the right words of greeting. Noah maintaining careful physical distance while offering polite conversation. But as the evening progressed, the familiar rhythms of shared meal and simple exchange began to ease the tension. Noah spoke about his military experiences, edited for parental consumption, but still more revealing than anything he had shared during our video calls. Our parents listened with genuine interest, asking questions that demonstrated their desire to understand his life rather than judge or direct it. "Your technical skills from service will translate well to cybersecurity," my father observed as Noah described his responsibilities in communication security. You've always had an analytical mind, even as a kid. The simple acknowledgement, this recognition of who Noah was rather than who our parents had wanted him to be, visibly impacted my brother. He looked up from his plate, surprise flickering across his features. "You noticed that about me?" "Of course," our father replied, seeming confused by the question. "You could solve puzzles faster than anyone I knew. Used to drive your sister? Crazy when you'd complete her brain teasers before she could figure them out." I laughed, remembering those childhood frustrations. He'd solve them and then not tell me how, just to be annoying. "Strategic advantage," Noah retorted with a hint of his old mischievous grin. The moment of light-hearted sibling banter, of shared family memory, fell into the room like a stone into still water, creating ripples of connection that expanded beyond the immediate exchange. For an instant, we were simply family, engaged, in the ordinary business of remembering our shared history. As the evening wound down, my father retrieved an envelope from his desk drawer. "We weren't sure if you'd want this," he said, extending it toward Noah. "But we've been writing monthly letters to Olivia as part of our reconciliation process. We've written them for you too, even without knowing if you'd ever read them." Noah stared at the envelope, tension returning to his posture. "Letters about what?" "Our failures," our mother said simply. "Our regrets. Our hopes for repair, if you're willing to consider it." My brother accepted the envelope but didn't open it. "I'll think about it," he said, tucking it into his jacket pocket. Not a commitment, but not an outright rejection either. As we drove back to my apartment afterward, Noah was quiet, processing the evening's events. Finally, he spoke. "They're different, smaller somehow, but also, I don't know, more authentic?" "Humbled," I suggested. "Life has a way of doing that, if you're paying attention." He nodded slowly. "The dad I remember would never have acknowledged anything positive about my natural abilities unless they served his purposes for the bakery." "The dad you remember wouldn't have survived losing everything he built his identity around," I replied. "The new version had to find different foundations." Noah considered this. "You really believe people can change that fundamentally?" I thought about the 3 years of letters, the careful rebuilding of trust, the gradual shifts in how we related to each other. I believe people can grow, given the right combination of motivation and opportunity. Our parents lost everything. The business, the house, their sense of identity, nearly Dad's life. That's powerful motivation for reevaluation. And the opportunity? You and I deciding whether to give them a second chance. The space to demonstrate change through consistent action over time. Noah fingered the envelope in his pocket. "I'm not sure I'm ready to read these yet." "No rush," I assured him. "They'll be there when and if you want them." Over the following weeks, Noah settled into a routine, starting his technology program, exploring job prospects, gradually spending more time with our parents in small, manageable doses. He didn't mention the letters again, but I noticed the envelope had moved from his jacket pocket to his bedside table, not yet opened, but not discarded either. As Thanksgiving approached, my mother raised the question of holiday plans during one of our regular phone calls. "We thought perhaps a restaurant this year," she suggested. "Neutral territory, and no one has to cook." The caution in her voice revealed her awareness of the holiday's symbolic weight. The first Thanksgiving with all 4 family members since before Noah and I had left home. The potential for both healing connection and painful triggers lay in every aspect of the occasion. "Actually," I said, "I was thinking we could host at my apartment. Noah and I could cook." The offer surprised me even as I made it. This willingness to create a new family tradition rather than simply navigate around the ruins of the old one. "You cook now?" My mother sounded both surprised and pleased. "Noah does most of the actual cooking," I'm on sous chef duty and digital timing management. Her laugh carried through the phone line. Well, we'd be honored to be guests at your table if you're sure. That evening, I discussed the plan with Noah, half expecting him to resist the idea of hosting our parents for a major holiday. Fine by me, he said with a shrug that didn't quite conceal his interest. I make a decent turkey. Military service. Teaches you surprisingly transferable skills. Including cooking? I asked skeptically. You'd be amazed what you can do with limited ingredients and equipment when properly motivated by hunger. He closed the textbook he'd been studying and gave me his full attention. You're sure about this? Thanksgiving was always a pressure cooker even in the best of times. I'm sure, I replied, realizing as I said it that it was true. I think we're ready for this next step, all of us. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving brought another significant development. During our regular Sunday dinner, my father announced that they had received unexpected news from the retirement community, management. They're offering us the chance to move to a larger unit, he explained. 2 bedrooms instead of 1 with a proper dining area. The monthly cost is more, but not prohibitively so with your mother's recent promotion. That sounds like a good opportunity, I said, noting the hesitation in his expression. Is there a concern about it? My parents exchanged glances. The timing, my mother explained. The unit would be available December 1st, which means moving during the holiday season. And with the increased cost. Understanding dawned. You're worried about the loan payments. My father nodded. We've never missed one, and we don't intend to start. But with the moving expenses and higher rent, it might be tight for a couple of months. We could adjust the payment schedule, I offered immediately. Reduce the amount temporarily while you get settled. The relief on their faces was evident, but my father shook his head. We don't want to change the terms. We agreed to. That commitment has been important, to all of us, I think. He was right. The consistency of those payments, arriving precisely on schedule each month, had been a tangible demonstration of their reliability, their commitment to making amends, not just in words, but in actions. What if we considered it differently? I suggested. Not changing the terms, but prepaying the final balance? My mother frowned in confusion. We don't have the resources for that right now. That's the whole issue. I know, I said. But I do. The proposal formed as I spoke it. This unexpected resolution that felt suddenly perfectly right. You've repaid 2/3 of the loan already. What if we consider the remainder a gift? Not forgetting the debt, but transforming it into something else. My father's expression grew cautious. What do you mean by something else? The loan served its purpose, I explained, thinking it through. It provided the medical care you needed, and it created a framework for rebuilding trust through consistent action. But maybe we've reached a point where that particular framework has done its job. You would just forgive the remaining balance? My mother sounded uncertain, as if searching for hidden implications. Not forget, but release, I clarified. Acknowledge that the financial obligation has served its purpose and that we're ready to relate to each other without it as intermediary. My father studied me intently. Are you sure about this, Olivia? That's a significant amount you'd be giving up. I'm sure, I said, surprising myself with the certainty I felt. The money was never the most important part of our arrangement. It was the commitment, the reliability, the honesty that mattered. You've demonstrated those consistently for 3 years now. The decision felt right, a natural evolution of our relationship rather than an abandonment of boundaries. The loan had created necessary structure during a time when trust was fragile and untested. Now, with 3 years of consistent evidence that my parents were capable of meeting their commitments, of respecting boundaries, of doing the difficult work of genuine change, that structure could evolve into something more flexible without sacrificing its essential strength. "We'll still write the letters," my father said, his voice carrying an emotion I couldn't quite name. "If that's okay with you." "I'd like that," I agreed. "They've become important to me too." That night, I drafted a formal document acknowledging the loan as satisfied in full, not erasing the agreement, but transforming it, recognizing both, where we had begun and how far we had traveled since that desperate phone call 3 years ago. When Thanksgiving arrived the following week, my apartment filled with the unfamiliar music of family holiday preparation. Noah orchestrated the kitchen, with military precision, assigning me specific tasks with explicit instructions. Our parents arrived bearing side dishes and dessert, fitting themselves into our space with careful respect for boundaries. As we gathered around my dining table, expanded with a rented table leaf to accommodate our small family, I was struck by how ordinary and extraordinary the moment felt. Just 4 people sharing a holiday meal, the most conventional of family activities, and yet the journey to reach this point had been anything but conventional. My father offered to say grace, a tradition from our childhood that had once felt performative, but now carried a different weight. "We give thanks for this food, for the hands that prepared it, and for the opportunity to share it together," he said simply. "We acknowledge the difficult path that has led us to this table, the harm done, and the healing begun. And we express gratitude for second chances, imperfectly offered and imperfectly accepted, but genuine in their intention." As we began passing dishes, Noah caught my eye across the table. The skeptical brother who had returned with military-hardened caution had gradually softened over the weeks, allowing tentative connection while maintaining careful boundaries. Now he offered a slight nod, acknowledging the significance of this gathering, the careful work of restoration it represented. "I read the letters," he said later, as we washed dishes while our parents rested in the living room. "All of them, in one sitting." I glanced at him, surprised. "That must have been intense." He nodded, methodically drying a serving platter. "It was like reading the script of a play I'd been in but never fully understood, seeing the same events from completely different perspectives." "Did it help?" He considered the question, taking his time. "I'm not sure help is the right word. It provided context, made me realize I've been stuck in a narrative that doesn't account for change or growth, theirs or mine." It was perhaps the most insightful thing I'd ever heard from my brother. This recognition that the stories we tell about our relationships can become static, failing to incorporate the evolving reality of human growth and change. "I'm not ready to fully forgive everything," he added, setting down the dish towel. "But I'm ready to acknowledge the possibility of a different kind of relationship moving forward, something healthier, with actual boundaries and respect." "That's all any of us can aim for," I agreed. "Not perfection, just genuine effort toward something better than what came before." After our parents left that evening, promising to host the next family dinner at their new, larger apartment once they'd moved, Noah and I sat in comfortable silence in my living room. The day had unfolded without major conflict or dramatic revelations, just ordinary family interaction, marked by the careful consideration that comes from acknowledging past harm while committing to present growth. "You know what's weird?" Noah said finally. "A few years ago, if someone had told me we'd have a peaceful Thanksgiving with Mom and Dad, I would have said they were delusional. Now it feels possible. Not perfect, not without effort, but possible." "That's the thing about healing," I replied. "It doesn't erase what happened. It just creates space for something new to grow alongside the scar tissue." He smiled at the metaphor. "Very poetic, sis." "Very accurate," I countered. "We're not the same people who left home. You to the military, me to that park bench. They're not the same people who made those terrible choices. We've all been shaped by what happened, but we're not defined by it anymore." As the evening wound down, I checked my email one last time before bed. Among the usual notifications and updates was a message from my mother, sent just after they had returned home. Thank you for today. Not just the meal, but the grace with which you've navigated this entire journey of reconciliation. The daughter we failed to properly see and support has become a woman of remarkable strength and compassion. We are learning from you now, as parents should have learned from you all along. With love and continuing gratitude for second chances, Mom. I sat with the message for a long moment, feeling the full circle of our story. From the devastating rupture 5 years ago to this point of genuine, if imperfect, reconnection. The journey had not been simple or straightforward. There had been no magical moment of complete healing, no dramatic scene where all hurts were instantly forgiven and forgotten. Instead, there had been the slow, careful work of rebuilding. One honest conversation, one respected boundary, one fulfilled commitment at a time. The loan that had initiated our reconnection had served as both practical solution and metaphorical framework, a structured pathway for demonstrating change through consistent action rather than empty promises. Now, with the financial obligation formally satisfied but the commitment to ongoing honest communication maintained, we were entering a new phase of relationship. One based not on obligation or control, but on mutual respect and recognition of each other's full humanity. The 18-year-old who had sat on that park bench with nowhere to go could never have imagined this outcome. In her fear and pain, she could see only two possibilities: complete estrangement or total capitulation. The idea that genuine change and meaningful reconnection might be possible would have seemed like dangerous wishful thinking. But the woman I had become understood that human relationships, even deeply damaged ones, contained more possibilities than either total rejection or unconditional acceptance. That there existed a middle path, one requiring clear boundaries, consistent accountability, and genuine effort from all involved. The journey wasn't over. Noah's healing had only just begun. Our parents continued to navigate their dramatically altered circumstances while working to maintain the growth they had achieved. And I was still learning to balance compassion with self-protection, connection with appropriate distance. But sitting there in my apartment, with the evidence of our shared Thanksgiving meal still visible and the quiet sound of my brother moving around the guest room, I felt something I had not expected to feel in relation to my family again: hope. Not naive expectation, but grounded optimism that with continued honest effort, the future might hold possibilities for connection that honored rather than erased the difficult truths of our past. I closed my laptop and prepared for bed, thinking about the holiday season ahead, our first as this new version of family, still finding our way, still learning the contours of these evolving relationships. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be missteps, old patterns temporarily resurfacing, new boundaries to establish. But we had built a foundation for navigating those challenges with honesty and respect rather than manipulation and control. And that, perhaps, was the most meaningful transformation of all. Not the forgiveness of financial debt, but the creation of a new model of family relationship, one built not on unwavering obligation or unrealistic expectation, but on the authentic recognition of each other's full, flawed, evolving humanity. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.